Hunting looks simple from the outside. You find an animal, you chase it, you kill it. But if you actually try to do it with no weapon, no training, no one to show you how, you will fail, repeatedly. And in the ancient world, failure had a cost that modern life does not. So how did early humans learn? Not in the abstract sense of evolution equipping them with instincts, but in the literal, practical sense. How did a child born 100,000 years ago become a hunter? The answer involves neuroscience, social structure, language, and a learning system so sophisticated that modern education theory is still trying to catch up with it. Let's start with what hunting actually required. It was not primarily a physical skill. Modern humans are not the fastest animal, not the strongest, not the most dangerous in a direct confrontation. What we are is the most persistent, the most cognitively flexible, and the most capable of cooperative coordination of any predator on Earth. Hunting leveraged all three of those things simultaneously. To hunt effectively, an ancient human needed to understand animal behavior well enough to predict movement. Where a herd would go when startled, where a single animal would seek water, how weather affected territory. They needed to read terrain, track across ground that revealed almost nothing to an untrained eye, and maintain spatial awareness across distances that could span many kilometers. They needed to use tools, spears, atlatls, bows, that required fine motor precision developed over years of practice. And they needed to coordinate with other hunters in real time, often silently, in ways that required a shared framework of signals, roles, and trust. None of this was instinct. All of it was learned. The first and most fundamental mechanism was observation. Long before a child in a hunter-gatherer society was given a weapon, they watched. They watched constantly, from infancy, in an environment where hunting was not a separate professional activity conducted elsewhere. It was part of the visible fabric of daily life. Hunters prepared their tools in camp. They returned with animals and processed them in full view. They discussed what had happened, where the animals were, what went wrong, what went right. Developmental psychologist Michael Tomasello at Duke University has spent decades studying what he calls shared intentionality, the uniquely human capacity to understand that other people have intentions, goals, and knowledge that can be shared and transmitted. Human children, unlike any other primate, instinctively follow the gaze of adults to understand what they are attending to. They interpret adult actions not just as physical movements, but as goal-directed behaviors that carry meaning. A child watching a hunter sharpen a spear is not just watching a physical process. They are absorbing a framework of purpose, technique, and intention. This kind of observational learning is extraordinarily efficient. It compresses decades of trial and error into hours of watching someone who already knows. The second mechanism was guided participation. Anthropologists studying contemporary hunter-gatherer groups have documented a remarkably consistent pattern of how children enter hunting. It is gradual, progressive, and deeply social. Among the Hadza of Tanzania, children as young as 3 and 4 accompany adults on foraging trips. They are not expected to contribute, they are expected to be present. By 6 or 7, boys begin handling small bows, not hunting yet, but developing the motor patterns and spatial intuitions that hunting requires. By 10 or 11, they are participating in small game hunting with peers and older boys. Full adult hunting capability typically develops through the mid-teens, built on a decade of progressive immersion. Anthropologist Barry Hewlett, who has studied the Aka people of Central Africa extensively, found that Aka fathers spend more time in direct physical contact with infants than fathers in almost any other documented culture. This is not incidental. The transmission of skill in hunter-gatherer societies is intensely relational. Knowledge does not live in texts or institutions. It lives in people. And access to that knowledge depends on the quality of the relationship you have with the person who holds it. The third mechanism was language. This is where human learning diverges most sharply from every other species. No other animal can tell a younger member of its group, "Last season, when we followed the river north, the wildebeest were moving east at the first rains. Go there first." No other animal can transmit not just what to do, but why, under what conditions, with what variations, and what to do when the expected pattern fails. Language allowed ancient hunters to encode knowledge that would otherwise take a lifetime of direct experience to acquire. A young hunter could arrive at a situation they had never personally encountered and have a framework for navigating it, because someone had described it to them in detail years before. Cognitive anthropologist Joseph Henrich at Harvard argues that this cumulative cultural learning, the ability to build on the knowledge of previous generations rather than starting from scratch, is the defining feature of human intelligence. It is not that individual humans are so much smarter than other animals. It is that human knowledge accumulates across generations in a way that no other species has achieved. Every hunter standing in a field 50,000 years ago was carrying the compressed knowledge of dozens of generations of hunters who had come before them. The fourth mechanism was failure, structured, survivable, and informative. Hunter-gatherer societies did not protect children from difficulty. They managed exposure to it. A child who failed to track an animal correctly was not punished, but the failure was visible, discussable, and embedded in a social context where improvement was expected and supported. Anthropologist David Lancy, who has synthesized research on childhood across cultures, notes that in most traditional societies, children are given real tasks with real consequences, but scaled to their current capability. The progression from small game to large, from familiar terrain to unfamiliar, from accompanied to independent, was not random. It was a curriculum, though no one called it that. The brain learns motor skills, spatial reasoning, and predictive modeling most efficiently through repeated cycles of attempt, feedback, and adjustment. The hunter-gatherer apprenticeship system was, neurologically speaking, close to optimal for the kind of embodied contextual knowledge that hunting required. There is one more thing worth understanding about how ancient humans learned to hunt, and it is the piece that the purely cognitive account misses. Hunting was not just a skill, it was an identity. In virtually every hunter-gatherer culture studied, the transition from child to hunter is marked by ritual, ceremony, test, initiation. The skills matter, but the meaning attached to those skills matters equally. A young hunter was not just learning how to track and throw. They were being inducted into a role that carried social weight, spiritual significance, and a particular relationship to the natural world. Anthropologist Tim Ingold has written extensively about what he calls the dwelling perspective, the way hunter-gatherer peoples understand themselves as participants in a living world rather than operators of an environment. An animal was not just a target. It was an entity with its own agency, its own knowledge, its own relationship to the landscape. Learning to hunt meant learning to enter into that relationship with respect and attention. That framing, hunting as relationship rather than extraction, shaped how knowledge was transmitted. You did not just learn the technique, you learned the orientation, the patience, the quality of attention that made the technique possible, which means that what ancient humans were really teaching their children, underneath all the practical instruction, was how to pay attention to the world. And that, in the end, may be the most sophisticated thing any education system has ever taught.